let's get started with the introductions. Let's start with you, Justin. Could you give us a little background on yourself and tell us what you do and
Yeah, for sure.
company and et cetera?
I'm Justin Miller. I'm the CEO and founder of High Life Solar. We're a commercial solar company specifically designed for cannabis cultivators. And so what we do, really our main goal is just to lower cultivators' monthly overhead on their utility expense, also get them eligible for tax credit incentives. We do that a few different ways, but I can dive into that a little bit later.
Okay, well, thanks for being aboard. How about you, Anders? Could you introduce yourself, give a little background?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Anders Peterson with PIPP Horticulture. I'm a molecular biologist and a cultivator for a little over the past decade, growing cannabis indoors. So I've run large facilities, small facilities, and done just about everything. And now I work on product development. I help with sales and facility designs.
Okay, well, thank you. Sam, how about you? Give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah. Hey, Adam. Hey, guys. Yeah, my name is Sam Milton. I own and operate Climate Resources Group. And what we do is we help growers grow more for less. We really work primarily kind of with the indoor horticulture clients and help them to reduce their operating costs while increasing their yields and being more profitable. So yeah, we look at all different ways they can do that. And energy efficiency is the biggest way that we do that. And we help bring free dollars to our clients for upgrading to their equipment to more energy efficient equipment, and so being more efficient. That's where we are.
Okay. For the first question, I guess anybody can jump in as they wish. How are rising costs affecting growers?
I can jump in there. I speak with a lot of growers on the day-to-day and know a lot of operators here in the space across the country. And I think what 2022 has taught all of us is the days of high price per pounds and big margins in cannabis are over. And the wholesale price per pound has been dropping. The markets are much more competitive, and growers are taking, in the cannabis space, a lot closer look at their operating costs and their cost to produce a single pound of dry flower. It is a necessity now. It used to be somewhat of a luxury to know those numbers many years ago. In fact, many of the facilities I toured in the last, I went to about 120 facilities in the last 2 to 3 years. And I would say a fraction of them actually knew the hard costs of what it took to produce a pound, and very little knew the metrics around their energy consumption. Mm-hmm. And so nowadays we have to get more lean. We have to know our numbers, and if not, this industry will chew you up and spit you out. And so there's been a lot of focus on it, which is good, because a lot of people have been preaching these efficiency conversations for years, somewhat to deaf ears for a long time, because we just had such a high value crop. And, it's interesting to hear, but right now I'm in Las Vegas at Indoor AgCon with PIPP Horticulture. And, these are different crops. These are basil, leafy greens, strawberries. And these operators are the complete opposite. They know an insane amount about their cost to produce a unit, but they're still learning some of the technical aspects of indoor cultivation and vertical farming that the cannabis operators have somewhat mastered over the past 10 years or so. And so there's a kind of an exchange of information. The business acumen with some of the technical crop production skills are crossing over. And it's a really interesting time, to be a cultivator and operator in this space.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Anders, I think we're nodding our heads, going along with what you're saying. And absolutely, yeah. I think for a long time, there's been this, at least where I come from. I mean, my energy background is my thing. So I've always been preaching to folks about, hey, it's important to be able to reduce your operating costs, so you can actually be a better running company. But to your point, I mean, it's fallen on deaf ears in the cannabis space for a long time, just because I think there's this mentality of go big or go home, right? And also just grow fast, or just wither on the vine. So it's traditionally there's been a big focus on just getting your facilities built up, get plants in the ground, start making money, and then maybe deal with energy efficiency and operational efficiency at a later date. I think now we're seeing that time come where it's you can no longer just rest on your laurels that you're going to be to your point, Anders, kind of making $3,000 a pound in the wholesale market, because it's not really happening anymore anywhere, at least not for very much longer. So I think a lot of folks out there are really suffering. But I think we'll have a good discussion about some of the ways that folks can actually make choices moving ahead to kind of reduce their operational costs, and be profitable down the line.
Yeah, I mean, and just to kind of sound off on what you guys were talking about, I mean, most cultivators that I meet with, their largest overhead expense is their utility bill. Mm-hmm. And kind of the wild thing about it, I mean, just to speak here in Colorado, Excel this past year increased their utility rate by 9%. And regardless of your business model, regardless of what industry you're in, if your largest overhead expense goes up 9% annually, it's really, really hard to have a sustainable business. And so really, I mean, for us going into these facilities, it's finding ways for them to reduce their usage, but future-proof their business in a way to help them produce power on site, so they're not subject to those things. But yeah, I mean, times are changing for sure in the cannabis space.
Okay, I guess that leads to the next question. How can energy efficiency solve these problems of rising costs?
Yeah, I can jump in real quick on that, and I want to hear what Justin and Andrews have to say also. But at its most fundamental, energy efficiency or inefficiency generally is kind of getting more out of your unit of input, whatever that might be. So as Justin mentioned, energy is definitely kind of one of the large expenses that a grower will have, next to labor, perhaps, which is also going up too. Keep in mind. The more you can get out per unit of your energy input, the better. And you can look at different ways, right? You could actually, reduce your energy cost and get the same amount of production, or you can get more production, out of the same amount of, of input, that you're using. So people can go at it in different ways. A big part of the work that we do is work with our cannabis cultivation clients to help them nab some of those utility efficiency incentives. And those are basically predicated on the assumption that you're going to be getting, no more production necessarily, but you're going to be dropping your power consumption. These programs they exist for the sole purpose of relieving some of that pressure, off the power grid. And different states have different motivations for why they create these programs. But the idea is that, hey, if you can install a certain widget or make an upgrade that can reduce your power consumption by 50% or so, or even 20% or even 10%, they'll pay you to make that move. It's a little harder in case, when folks are swapping out 1,000-watt HPS fixtures and putting in 1,500-watt LEDs. But we're trying to see some really creative work around there to look at, all right, if you are getting more production, there could be a case to be made for if you were to do the same level of production using HPS, what would that look like? So not every utility kind of will allow us to make that case, but we're seeing some creative ways that folks are thinking about efficiency, not just in terms of the energy cost reduction thing, but also, hey, just getting more per your units. So yeah, it's essential.
What are some? Oh, did I just interrupt somebody?
No, yeah, here I'll jump in there too. It's really interesting talking about the utilities as well. Is the indoor agriculture rebate and incentive programs are so new that it's taking a lot of industry involvement to really shape those programs so that these growers can realize that money that's out there for them by operating efficiently. And it's something that I advocate to anyone who will listen is get involved with these industry organizations who are doing good work on, utility incentive rebate programs for indoor agriculture. There's a lot of them out there. I mean, I was involved working with, I've worked with ASHRAE, Resource Innovation Institute, a number of other, even ASTM, not doing as much on the efficiency side, but it's amazing how involvement and speaking up, if you don't talk about these issues and help them better understand the metrics and numbers with the equipment you're using and how you operate these facilities, these programs will be shaped in a way that won't benefit you. And so the money's out there, get involved and speak up, and you can realize sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars back by making the right CapEx decisions when building your facility and choosing efficient equipment. And it's blown my mind, coming from the black market, I didn't even know those things were out there. I was used to stealing power. And so, and,
Yeah.
or, trying to fly under the radar with the power I was using and the utilities I was using. And now it's like I'm reaching out to PG&E and SoCal Edison and speaking with Consumers Electric and these different utilities across the country because, it's money on the table that will help your bottom line as a cultivation business, and it will help you afford more efficient technologies. And what I've found too is oftentimes the more efficient technologies, they may cost more upfront when you're building your facility, but they often come with a lot of performance gains too from a cultivation perspective. So you're not just getting a more efficient technology to lower your utility costs. Oftentimes you're getting better plant performance out of these systems. For example, HVAC and dehumidification. The newer hot gas reheat, integrated modulating hot gas reheat systems where you don't have standalone dehumidifiers anymore. You have a fully packaged unit that can handle heating, cooling, dehumidification all in one very efficient package. You also get better environmental control in these rooms, which leads to more production. So it's an example you were talking about, Sam, where you're now dropping your energy input, but you're also increasing your output at the same time with tighter VPD control and better grams per square foot. And that extra cost of these higher performing environmental control systems or mechanical systems can be offset by utility incentives. But because there's no federal regulation on all of these privately owned utilities, you kind of have to fight the battle in each region and make sure that there's a model for these utilities to understand this application. Why is there such a large latent load and such a large dehumidification load? It draws a lot of power. Why are there so many lights in these facilities? And helping them understand how to baseline and compare against inefficient technologies is a really big challenge right now to me. But because it's hard to understand how these operate in a plant growth facility, just so many engineers and aren't familiar with growing plants indoors. And so it's up to cultivators and people who are knowledgeable in this industry to help educate, these regulators and utilities. And you can see the benefit from that. So at the end of the day, all of these things will help just reduce your operating cost and be more competitive to stay alive in this hyper competitive and consolidating industry. So forgive my little rant there, but
no, I hear you, and just I'll jump in and Justin, I don't want to take all your time, but yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's important to engage these programs, and it's if you're I who's an operator, a grower, you're not going to really know how to do that, but there are representatives out there through organizations like ASHRAE, the I think Association for Standard for Heating and Air Conditioning. I think
that's American Society of Heating and Air Conditioning Engineers.
There we go. I was close.
Yeah.
But the Resource Innovation Institute is definitely a good organization. Shout out to them. Done some work with them in the past. And there are definitely some really curious and engaged utilities out there who are trying to do work to figure this stuff out. You mentioned Consumers Electric, they're energy, they're really great up in Michigan. A lot of Michigan utilities are really pushing on this. California has been kind of an odd case for a long time, but I think there's definitely kind of push and pull happening there. But I think there's the longer that this industry has been existing and is kind of working to to get some of the operators going out in front of these programs, the more they're getting the hang of it. But yeah, you're right. There's a long way to go before these programs truly, I think, are able to respond to the needs of the operators. And that's what I do almost every day, as I have conversations with utilities and explain to them, why my client's project, should be, worth, 10 times, what the kind of their initial kind of offer is. Because you look at the interactive effects, of installing LEDs and what that means in terms of reducing the cooling load, in a facility. And there are lots of different ways, these grow operations can experience the interactive effects from making some really smart decisions. Controls is a big part of it for sure.
Yeah,
and that's something that's not understood really at all at the utility level right now.
And I mean, just to jump in on that, I mean, just from an education piece, I think it's two-sided. I think utility companies need to be educated as far as what these cultivations need and what they require and the best way to help them. But at the same front, I think cultivators need to be educated on what incentives there really are out there from utility companies and even statewide.
Yeah.
Then even just speaking for me personally, benefits to offsetting their power from producing their power locally. A lot of these, I mean, particularly in the southwest part of the country, these states and utility companies will incentivize these cannabis cultivators to produce their own power. A lot of cultivators aren't aware of that. And so really just, at least from my angle, when I come and meet with people, a lot of it's education and just showing them options and then advocating for them to the utility company and bridging that gap.
Yeah. There's definitely need out there for advocates, you know, like you guys, they really kind of speak on behalf, of the customer, because I mean, most of the folks out there who I've met who are, growers or operators, I mean, they've got 1,000 things to do, right? Like, the last thing they want to do is sit on hold with the utility representative, trying to explain their project to them. And they're not going to do it, right? I mean, I think, I've had so many stories of growers, and I use that term to reflect the entire organization. But dropped the ball in these incentive programs because they didn't have the bandwidth to deal with it. Even if they knew about it, they're like, I don't know what to do, and it's like easier just to get things going off the out of the gate. So you see folks making some mistakes by not putting in the time and energy to do that. So it's great. Yeah, there are people like us out there who can really kind of help take the ball for them and navigate the bureaucracies that are kind of foreign to a lot of folks who like Andrew said, you grew up in the black market, right? You never think to call your utility for help with your operation. It was just insane.
I was gonna ask you, Anders, did you ever use solar when you were growing in the black market to try to hide some of your usage?
Not me. I grew in a dense urban area in Berkeley, Oakland area for most of my life. But I will say a number of my friends and colleagues up in, the Humboldt or the Emerald Triangle area use solar all the time just to run, they used very minimal power compared to what we were using indoors in Berkeley, but they would use solar to run their irrigation pumps and help run all their motors in their greenhouses. And it was definitely always used for sure. One of the things too, I think is pretty cool is one thing I think growers can do to help with this thing, to help further this conversation and to provide value to the people who are fighting this fight with the utilities is go on to the Resource Innovation Institute website and enter your facility statistics into their Power Score database. It's free. And you can see how your facility stacks up and compares against other facilities of the same type. So it's a great way. It can be anonymous, and I sound like I work for Resource Innovation Institute, but I don't. I really believe in their mission, and I think a lot of what they're doing is really valuable. Derek Smith over there, he's a good guy, great team. And the Power Score database is basically a way to collect all of your utility bill information and metrics and KPIs about your facility. And Resource Innovation Institute and all the people working with them can use that information and leverage it to then go to your utility and share with them this information. It can be anonymous, so you won't be named, but it's really valuable tools. And in fact, with PIPP horticulture, we do vertical farming, vertical mobile racks, and we do a lot of the 2-3 tier flower rooms, multi-tier veg spaces, even vertical dry cure spaces, primarily for indoor cannabis cultivation. And one thing I'm very curious about is how does the effect of going vertical in an indoor cultivation facility affect overall facility efficiency? Because having increased canopy in a smaller footprint means a lot of your motors and equipment running that room scale up and get inherently more efficient. And so I've seen preliminary kind of anecdotally, some data that suggests that just going vertical alone is a decision in your design process that can further the efficiency, not only space efficiency and volume efficiency of your building, but also impacts the energy and utility efficiency of your building as well. Plus increases your output because you're producing so much more in a smaller space. So it's a really interesting kind of thing that we're currently working on right now to kind of quantify. But I'm interested in pursuing with utilities rebates for vertical racking as a design element that influences overall, utility, the power pulling from the grid. So there's precedent for incentivizing hard goods, things that don't pull from the grid, and as just a design element that influences efficiency. So we'll see how that goes, but that's a really exciting thing that I'm interested in right now. Another shout out to consumers, by the way, is they're currently working on a research project where they have put power monitoring relays and power monitoring devices on a number of indoor facilities in Michigan with different types of cooling, heating, dehumidification systems, lighting systems, single tier, multi-tier, and they're collecting a ton of data and will hopefully be releasing a report, I think sometime in April, maybe May, where they'll show the results of this power monitoring and really show it'll be the basis for baselining these different technologies against each other and then assigning dollar values to those technologies that you choose for these rebates. And so that's going to be a really interesting report to keep an eye out for. They're a great utility, really diving in like head first into this indoor agriculture conversation. I know that SMUD has done a number of great reports too, and I think Excel has as well out in Denver. SMUD's in Sacramento. So some utilities are really leading the charge, and and the cultivators in those areas are truly benefiting from it.
Yeah, and Anna, just to piggyback on what you mentioned earlier about the importance of benchmarking your data and going to the Resource Innovation Institute and putting your information in. I mean, that's just the first step, along the way of becoming, a savvier energy user as a cultivator. But yeah, you definitely have to be able to make the commitment to understanding kind of what your operation looks like, right? Kind of just where are you, in the spectrum of operations, in your area. So you have a sense like, hey, are you killing it, in terms of your production, vis-a-vis your inputs, or do you have a little ways to go? And once you have that insight, then you can begin to think about, all right, what sort of changes do I need to make in my operation? We're working with an organization that actually come in and do energy audit, for operations like that have that curiosity around, how can they be a better performing operation? And so we'll come in and do a whole energy audit, the facility, kind of look at the data at a granular level to see, all right, what are the opportunities to make improvements? And typically we can find 10 to 30% energy savings, just from doing that energy audit and kind of, and calling out some of the red flags that we see. And that's a predicator to, doing a deeper kind of energy retrofit project. We're calling in Justin and going for an on-site generation opportunity. But yeah, it's definitely a journey, that it's got to be on, and it's no easy fixes really. You can make some, you can swap out some LEDs for HPS, but you have to learn how to, work, in that new LED environment. I'd say it's not worth it. It definitely is. But there's no silver bullet, I don't think, out there. But there's a lot of support and resources for folks who want to be able to, to be, growing more for less. And it's really, it's imperative right now, given the market, for a product out there and for costs going up. I mean, it's definitely something that I think, serious growers have to do, if they want to compete and survive.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think the adoption to LEDs has been a really interesting thing to watch. That whole, there's a lot of hesitation to move to LED fixtures from cultivators. And now I think more and more, if you're not considering LED fixtures and some sort of vertical approach to farming indoors, it's almost every project is considering at least those type of design elements in their facility. And they make so many more implications than just going from HPS to LED. As a cultivator, there's so many other efficiency gains going to LEDs that I've enjoyed. One being I can run my rooms warmer to achieve the same leaf temperature or VPD in my spaces. And so running these rooms warmer under LEDs to get the same results under HPS means my HVAC or cooling equipment is working less. And that's awesome, right? So I'm using less cooling power to achieve the same plant conditions while reducing, hopefully, my input wattage, except if you're using these super high PPFD or 1500 watt LED fixtures. I don't think everyone is using those. There's a trend towards high PPFD cultivation. We'll see if that sticks or not, but currently most are using something around 700 watts, give or take. So you're decreasing your input wattage, and you're also reducing how much your cooling equipment has to work. And so it's kind of twofold making some of these, efficient technology decisions.
Yeah.
Okay. What are some of the common mistakes that you see in building facilities?
Yeah, I can jump in quick on that one. And I think, as I mentioned a little earlier, the biggest mistake really is not doing kind of due diligence around facility design, and it's assuming that if you've done a project and if you've done a grow operation in a given space, you can scale it up tenfold just by multiplying everything that you did before by 10 and hoping for the same result. That's definitely not going to work. And also there's really just, I think, an assumption that you can, go with whatever off the shelf technology, that you see, like, okay, here's lights, we'll put lights in. We need some cooling, so we'll put cooling in. Dehumidification, we'll put dehumidification in, and not thinking about kind of how they all work together. I think is kind of one of the biggest problems, because these facilities do work holistically. I mean, they are a system. They comprise a system, especially on the energy side. It's fairly complex. Kind of how the energy flows through an indoor grow facility. You've got the light coming down into the plants, and the humidity from the root zone transpires through the leaves, and then again it all kind of has a fascinating effect in terms of the energy consumption of that space. Not to mention the plant health too, of course. I mean that tends to be first and foremost. But yeah, I think this is kind of just their rush to get something done and in the ground. I think that's probably been the biggest problem that we've seen. It's a lot of poorly built out facilities just because corners were cut, and there was a focus on urgency instead of doing it right.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. That was well said, Sam. I think some of the biggest mistakes I see in facilities are undersized mechanical systems or poorly installed mechanical systems. Mm-hmm. So, even if you have basically undersized HVAC and dehumidification capabilities, that's often what I see. And that really negatively impacts, your yields, your plant health, and you end up using more power to put Band-Aids on solving that problem. It's a very difficult system to retrofit. So I always recommend cultivators get that right up front and put a lot of their budget towards the mechanical system and the overall construction and fixtures within the room. You can always upgrade fertigation and lighting at a later date. It's relatively easier to retrofit. But mechanical systems and the overall benching and layout of your facility, mm-hmm. It's fixed once you get up and running. So pay really close attention to that. But I think overall growers want to have the right capacity. They want to balance these systems. To your point, Sam. First of all, that was beautiful. Energy balance is not only important from an efficiency standpoint and right sizing all of these systems to work synergistically together, but energy balance is also an important tool for cultivators to understand. And so I run my grow rooms using control systems like you were talking about, Sam, off energy balance principles, because energy in, energy out, and that plant is just a mechanism for converting different forms of energy in there. And so many greenhouse growers in the Netherlands, they run greenhouses based off energy balance principles, total radiation or lighting in, transpiration out, daily average temperature. You can balance all of these cultivation parameters with the systems in your indoor cultivation facility, right? Input of cooling, amount of heat generated in the space, and you balance all of these systems and what's going on with the plant, and you get a very fast growing, high yielding, healthy crop. And so it's not just an efficiency conversation. It comes back to benefiting growers directly with quality and quantity as well, understanding how energy flows through these facilities. But growers want to do it right. I think and the owners too, and investors. The problem with cannabis right now is access to capital, traditional access to funding that a lot of other industries have. It's like it's not even they don't even think about it. They don't even understand how lucky they are being able to raise capital the way they can. Cannabis they've got a lot of chips stacked against them in that process. It's very difficult to go get a construction loan. It's very difficult to get financing on equipment at a fair rate. It is egregious, I think, what some of these financing deals look like. And I get it. There's a lot of risk involved when you're trying to financially support a project like this when it's still federally illegal. And so again, going back to advocacy and what can you do, banking reform at a federal level, get involved with more industry organizations and speak up, because once that 280E tax law, that federal tax law that prohibits us from doing a lot of these things, is removed from the equation, I think, not only will these businesses be more profitable from a day-to-day standpoint, but they'll also build better facilities that will be more efficient. And so if the United States wants more efficient cannabis industry, that banking reform is not just about security and public safety. It's also about conserving our natural resources. And it's impacting it way deeper than they can see right now, but it will result in a more efficient industry, a safer industry, more profitable industry for everyone involved. So yeah, that banking reform needs to go. It'll help people afford the right capacity in terms of mechanical systems, afford more efficient technologies in other areas of the grow, and be able to make these decisions easier without feeling like they're going bankrupt in the process. So yeah, I don't know. I'll get off my soapbox there, but
no, I mean, you said that beautifully. It's 90% of the cultivators I meet with, their biggest inhibiting factor to upgrading their facility or purchasing a solar array is capital. They can't get conventional financing, and the financing they do get, the monthly payment for the solar would be higher than what they're already paying for their utility bill. So it leaves people to want to pay cash when they can't get tax incentives because they're not federally legal. It really is a giant roadblock for a lot of people to enable them to do what they want to do. It needs to change soon.
Justin, I have a question for you, if you don't mind. Are you seeing much, maybe like third parties coming in and kind of owning that solar asset, and then basically, selling that power, to the customer, that's on site, or maybe, not, if you current parcels or even a county or two away. Are you seeing much innovation kind of in that financial, sort of
absolutely.
space?
So, I mean, that's a great question. So there are a lot of private equity groups that are reluctant to just give money to a cannabis cultivator. What they are willing to do is purchase the solar array, lease land from the cultivation, and then sell that energy to the cultivation at a cheaper rate. And what we've been seeing, and there are some cultivators with capital who, we can monetize their tax credits. They want to own the system. It just adds equity to the establishment as a whole. But for people who are constrained on capital, it's called a PPA. It's just a power purchase agreement. That is hands down the fastest way to lower your monthly overhead as a cultivator, because there's nothing out of pocket. An investor owns the system. An investor gets the tax credits, but instead of getting energy from the utility company, you're buying power from the solar array that's right next to your facility for a cheaper rate. And that way it really, the barrier to entry as far as clean energy and cheaper energy is pretty much eliminated. So yeah, that's a great question. That really is kind of the trend moving forward, because investors are willing to do it, and it really benefits cultivators.
Yeah, I found that, where the financial community, has a stake in solving a problem, they'll be creative and make it happen. And thankfully, I think on the solar side, you are kind of seeing a bit of that. But again, it's taking a while, because at some point, the cash flow to the owner of that system has to come from of an operation, and somewhere along the line has to be identified as like, yeah, these guys are growing cannabis, which is not federally legal exactly, And that kind of trips things up. But yeah, I'm glad to hear you're saying, Justin, there are some opportunities out there for folks, who they can't get the capital to borrow for a system, or they don't want to pay the, cash up front. Then they can, to work with a third party to kind of to help them to go solar and can reduce their operating costs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I really feel like as this progresses, or as utility costs become more of a pain point for the industry, or as people start to see benefits of renewable energy, even just from like a lower overhead, from the financing sector, they'll see more opportunities there because the model's been proven to work. And so I think from both sides, they'll be able to benefit just because there's getting traction.
Yeah. Are you seeing a greater interest in solar these days for cannabis cultivators in the past? Because I have personally, I hear it being brought up in conversations more and more frequently than I have in previous years. And it does seem like operators are getting more keen to what you're saying here, is the financial benefits and the offsetting or the reliance on the local utility. I see more and more renewable energy discussions occurring, and definitely solar is at the forefront. What's the trend you're seeing on that front?
Yeah, I mean, people are definitely interested in it. The two limiting factors we ever really see, because most people we talk to have a pretty big genuine interest. One of it is just space available. People are operating, in an urban area and all they have is their rooftop. Typically, we're not going to be able to offset all of their power. And so that's not necessarily going to work as far as really benefiting them financially. But if they have land and they have capital and they can own the system, it's really a no-brainer. But even if they have land and they don't have capital, we can find an investor that's willing to own that system and sell them energy. And so it's definitely more of an interest. And I think the interest is, the carbon emissions from the cannabis industry is a relatively big talking point. I feel like people are talking about it more. Less from cultivators and more like from consumers, I think. But cultivators, their primary, pain point is just the utility costs. We're working with a cultivation here in Colorado who is paying on average like 35 grand last year for their utilities, and it's up to 42 this year. And so it's just hard to maintain a business model when your largest overhead expense is kind of out of your control.
Yeah. Well, I think reducing the reliance on a utility is also I guess it's sort of a safety factor, I guess, for these cultivators. I've seen it firsthand in Oakland, where a lot of the utility infrastructure is outdated, frankly. And, I'm not going to name names, but there's a cultivator I'm aware of and a facility in Oakland that was, an old building, old cannery type building on the train tracks. And they had very old, power infrastructure, and they blew this transformer that like one guy in the world knew how to fix, kind of thing. And so it was going to take, I think, 6 months to a year to even try and get that back up and running. So what did they do? They bring in 18-wheeler generators, diesel generators, into their parking lot, 3 of them. I think it was like, I forget exactly, it was like a megawatt or more of power. And it was an insane amount of power they brought in on these trucks. And their monthly utility bill went from $150,000 a month to $250,000 a month. And they had to absorb that for over 6 months. And so it was the death to the business, unfortunately. Like it was something that it was very hard to recover from. And at the same time, they got killed by a lower price per pound and wholesale price dropping in California. And unfortunately, that business just didn't survive. And so it was very sad to see, because they were really good people and really responsible operators. They were doing the best they could with the situation, but a lot of that had to do with the reliance on the utility, I guess, but, which isn't a bad thing. But I have seen a lot of freedom, I guess, gained by generating your own power. Cogen, for example, is another thing that I've seen so much more as these facilities scale up. Having a cogen plant and using a 4-pipe system, like, the chiller boiler, and working them all in tandem, using heat capture. It's a hyper efficient system that you are also generating your own power and being able to sell it back to the grid. And I see them a lot more popular on the East Coast now, the New York and New Jersey jobs, but I've seen one here in in Central California, 400,000 square foot indoor has its own power plant, you know, and you don't need to be that big to justify that cost by any means, but there's a lot smaller cogen plants out there and engines out there, but it's a really interesting concept to me. I was blown away the first time I heard about that. I was like, what? You can build your own power plant and, you know, at a relatively small scale and run my grow off of it. And, you know, like I was loving that, you know, I thought that was so cool.
Well, yeah, and many, yeah, so go, Justin.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I mean, many utilities actually, they'll pay for those systems too. You know, a cogen facility is a really good way to reduce the power load that site, you know, has, and that's worth a lot of money to utilities. So they can, you know, they'll pay for most of those costs, in some cases, for an operator that wants to, you know, install a system like that. I mean, that's the thing, these utility programs, let's go back to that real quick, is that, you know, you can submit almost any idea that you have that, you know, is viable, and, you know, say, hey, you know, we want to make this upgrade, or we want to, you know, to design this facility to have these components. You know, this is what we think is gonna be saving you in terms of power, and you know, and pay us. And if you can make that case, which if you're creative, you know how the system works, you can often make that case. And like you said, I mean, folks are getting, you know, $500,000, you know, $1 million in incentive checks, you know, for these facilities that they're building out, which is astonishing. And so, yeah, you know, it's all about kind of having that vision and that patience, I think, to be able to think a little bit outside of the box. And you know, unfortunately, it tends to be those that are more capitalized, the larger operations, and it's tough for folks who don't have a lot of, you know, time or money to pursue kind of these, you know, these hyper efficient, you know, more advanced facilities. But yeah, I think as the Safe Banking Act, you know, hopefully, you know, evolves and gets passed, that access to capital will be less of a problem, and you'll see folks across the board, you know, being more willing and able to, you know, to step up and say, hey, yeah, you know, it's important for me to have a facility that is more sustainable, that is, you know, costs me less to operate, and, you know, actually helps me to stay in business longer. So I think it's a very interconnected, you know, situation here. But I think we'll get there. You know, I feel optimistic. I'm an internal optimist, and I think that, you know, if there's enough, if there's, you know, a concerted, you know, a collection of voices that are informed, that are engaging at the right levels, that we can move the needle. But yeah, it's going to take a while, and yeah, kind of, you know, joining your associations, joining your different boards, and speaking up and representing, you know, kind of the industry, and kind of your experience is essential, because, you know, a lot of these folks who make these programs, who are, you know, in the bureaucracy, they don't know the first thing about cannabis cultivation. And I think it's just another industry, but it's not. So yeah, it's a battle, but we'll get there, I think.
And I mean, to just kind of echo what you guys were saying, I think there's, especially cultivators who plan on being around for a while, the idea I talk about with them a lot is future proofing their business. And whether it's you're in a high density area where there's rolling blackouts often, and you are dependent on the grid, that really inhibits you from growing the best product that you can. On another scale, it's, you know, just increased utility rates. And part of it is, you know, utility companies aren't evil. It's the grid is only so big. More people are moving in and using it. It costs money to build infrastructure, so utility costs go up. But I think a lot of cultivators just aren't aware that there are ways that they can get around that. And the really cool thing is, with renewable energy, or whether you have your own power plant at your site, electricity is an asset. And so, I mean, we're working with a cultivation that has over 100 acres of free land. We're going to build a solar array there that's going to power their facility. And then that's going to be a cash flowing asset for them, because they're going to sell their excess power to the grid. And so it really future proofs their business from not being dependent on the grid for their own power, but now they have cash flow regardless of how, you know, what price per pound it is. And so really it's a great option to like hedge their bets, but also just have a lot of peace of mind as far as the operation of their facility.
How has the solar technology advanced in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, for honestly, in recent years, it hasn't changed a ton. I mean, a lot of it is just the efficiency of the panels, the size of the panels that they're building. Really, what we've seen a lot of growth in these past years is actually the storage capacity for this power. There's a lot of cultivators in really, really rural areas that the grids actually can't handle the power that the solar arrays provide. So something that's kind of come out in recent years is something called a microgrid. And so it's essentially a really big battery, but think about the grid infrastructure in a city. They essentially compact that into a few storage units and put that on site. And kind of like you were talking about, you now have your own power grid that's on your site that you can sell, you can distribute, but that you can store. And so really the technology increase over the past years has just been the storage of power and the consolidation of the asset that is energy.
Justin, are you finding those are cost competitive? I mean, I know they're not cheap, but are those penciling out for folks to install a system like that?
It totally depends on their situation. If people have a cultivation that is attached to a grid that has the infrastructure for a solar array, I never recommend storage. Mostly because those larger grids, they're going to have something called net metering, where any excess power that you produce, they'll essentially distribute to people around you, and you'll get credits for that power. So there's not necessarily a purpose for the storage. But if you're in, areas that you're pretty isolated, from a cost perspective, they're relatively competitive. I mean, I'd be lying if I said they weren't expensive. Yeah. But as far as peace of mind and being able to save that asset, which is the energy, it always pencils out to work.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I had some other questions, but I think you guys already answered them. You guys are great.
Cool.
So is there anything else you guys would want to expand on, or something you want to talk about?
I mean, I would just say that sustainability for the cannabis industry it's a buzzword, but it's becoming more and more meaningful. Especially as consumers, are becoming more motivated to shop with their pocketbooks in terms of what sort of business do they want to support? Do they want to give money to a business that they feel actually reflects their values as somebody who doesn't want to trash the planet? Or that's going for the cheapest thing possible. I think as there are more options for folks across the country for cannabis consumers to participate in the market, they really kind of want to be able to show that that they care. And I think for those smart businesses, they'll kind of see those signals and be like, hey, it's worth it for us to not only do this because it reduces our operating costs, but we can get some really legitimate credibility for being a more sustainable operation. And then you're also seeing a little bit, I think another driving factor is on the compliance side. So a number of states, as they roll out their programs, are requiring some operators, or depends on the type of business, but requiring at least a focus to some extent on energy conservation, energy efficiency, renewable energy. I know Massachusetts, down the road where I am, requires all applicants for an adult use or medical cultivation facility to check a box and say, hey, yeah, we've thought about solar, it didn't work out, or it did work out, but this is what we thought about. We've engaged the utility programs. We're thinking about ways to reduce our overall energy demand during kind of those peak times of the day. I think you're seeing, more of that. New York State is going to be pushing a lot on the sustainability piece. And I think it's going to be a balance of kind of the carrots and sticks out there. But I think they can work in tandem, even if you're in a state that does have those regulations. A lot of times, I mean, if you're doing stuff right, it's not going to be a hard lift, to check those boxes. But I think we're going to see more people who are going to be, driven to consider, solar, and driven to consider, a more holistically integrated facility, by virtue of those regulatory and kind of, and consumer signals.
Well, and I was actually going to ask you guys, I mean, a thought I've had even before I started High Life Solar. I mean, you can go into the grocery store and you can see when things have been grown ethically, or when something's organic, or when it's free range chickens, or you're very informed about the food you purchase and the process that was involved in that food. Have you guys seen any, or do you think it would be a good idea when I go into a dispensary, there's like, whether it's similar to like an organic logo or something, but some kind of marking that shows this weed was grown in an energy efficient facility, or this weed was grown in a facility that has zero carbon footprint, or in a way to inform consumers on what they're purchasing. Because the consumers I talk with, they really care about those things, but unless they do deep dives on whatever companies or cultivations they're buying stuff from, they don't really know that. Have you guys heard anything about anything like that, or do you think it's a good idea?
I've heard some people discuss a sort of certification program around energy efficiency. I know there's a couple being brought up right now in different industry organizations. The way I've heard it discussed is the Energy Star for cannabis, essentially, right? Like, you know, by having this logo on my package, I have been, you know, I've been verified that my facility and my practices, my SOPs are adhering to these certain standards that dictate I am an efficient, sustainable business. There's a lot of other, beyond energy efficiency, there's a lot of other sustainable, like Dragonfly Earth Medicine is a legacy cultivator who does a lot for organic cultivation. They created a certification and have their own logo you can put on your package if you meet their standards. And it is way more stringent than USDA organic certification and, you know, things like that. And so we're really leading the charge with policing our own industry and keeping everyone honest in operating efficiently. I think it's a great idea, though. You know, I think as time goes on, right now, I think everyone's trying to survive, right? That's, I think, and everyone's trying to differentiate to survive. And these type of things are what can help you differentiate on the shelf. Retail shelf space is few and far between. It's very hard to get shelf space in California, for example. It's almost a pay-to-play type scenario. And if you have, so first and foremost, you got to have good product. You got to have good weed. Good weed always sells. So have a good facility that can produce good weed. And if you can do it efficiently and market to your consumer that you're doing it responsibly, that's a good strategy to being successful. We'll see.
Yeah. Cool. No, it's funny, Justin, that you mentioned the labeling piece, because I'm involved in the Michigan Cannabis Regulatory Agency's Sustainability Work Group. I chair the energy group. And one of the ideas that we have that came from one of our operators was that, a labeling program, you know, a certification program for energy would be great. There's one right now for kind of for social equity, I believe in Michigan, but there's definitely kind of, a desire for those operators that are going above and beyond to be able to demonstrate that to the customers. And a picture of a plant or like a sun or a rainbow, I don't know what it would be, can provide that for cultivators. But I know we have to be careful again about, like, you don't want to give everybody a certification for energy efficiency, just because they may have bought an LED fixture one day. So there's going to be some homework to do in order to kind of get those certification programs kind of up and running. But Anders, as you mentioned, there are a few out there already. I think like the Resource Innovation Institute, kind of one of the earlier organizations. I know they got to start touting kind of the wanting to create a lead for weed certification. Yeah. So I'm not sure if they got there yet with that, but there are folks trying to do the right stuff. It's just a matter of kind of harnessing all the energy and agreeing on one or two standards, that everyone can get behind. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I guess I would just like to leave it off, like, being a cultivator myself, I always like to speak or at least wrap things up directly to my cultivator friends, and like the people that I surround myself with. And while a lot of this may seem foreign to these conversations around energy efficiency or new, there are people out there that can help you. And oftentimes, even if they cost a little bit of money to help you navigate these programs, you end up getting more money at the end of the day if you were to try to do it yourself. Yeah. And so don't let your ego get in the way or hubris, type nature get in the way. Go out and ask for help and engage the professionals and experts, people like Sam, people like Justin, and they will help you navigate all of this in a way that it'll be worth it. And to your bottom line, I mean, really quick, I can wrap up with some stats here. There's in indoor cultivation, the average cost to produce a pound is somewhere around $400 to, that's a big range, $400 to $1,000. But let's just say the average is about $400 or $500 to produce a pound indoors, depending on where you are. 30% of that cost is roughly your utility costs. It varies depending on what technologies you have, but that 25-ish, 30% range is with the kind of legacies type installs of less efficient technologies, standalone dehumidifiers, all these different things that draw a lot of power. Now, I've seen firsthand, and I have the data to show it, is when you start choosing more efficient things like mechanical systems. I see a facility that went from single tier HPS, standalone dehus, inefficient air conditioning systems. They switched over to multi-tier LED with a water-cooled DX system and water-to-water runaround coils, energy recovery, components in their facility. They dropped it from 30% to 11.8% of their total cost of production, right? Then a similar scale and type of business took that number even further down using a 4-pipe hydronic system, and a very efficient mechanical system there with LEDs, multi-tier, to only 8% of their cost of production. Wow. And so then once you get that number down below that 10% range, now when your competitors across the street are producing at $600-$700 a pound, maybe $1,000 a pound, and you're closer to $300-$250 a pound, you're now not competing with your other indoor competitors. You're competing with the greenhouses in your area. Mm-hmm. And that should be your goal, right? You should be competing with the greenhouse folks. And it really means a lot to your business and being able to survive these ups and downs of this wild cannabis ride. So it's real money that you're saving here. It's not in the margins. It's significant.
Well said.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been really great. You guys are very informative, and I don't think there's any editing.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, for organizing this. I appreciate it. And,
thank you.
Yeah, guys, nice to meet you both. And
I'd
love to have calls with both of you. No, Justin, we tried it a few weeks ago. Let's try again.
We'll make it happen.
And Anders is definitely on the phone and chat. This is going to be good.
Yeah,
likewise.
We'd love to pick your brain.
Cool.
Likewise, guys. Let's stay in touch. And Sam, you said you're out there in the East Coast?
I'm in Maine. I'm based in Maine. I don't know if you can see you probably can't see the snow, but there's snow back there. But yeah, I'm gonna be in. Are you coming to NECAN in Boston?
I was just gonna ask you the same thing. I'll be in Boston in a few weeks, so we have a booth there at PIPP, and I'll be speaking there with a colleague of mine at PIPP. So yeah, I would love to connect in Boston in a few weeks.
Cool. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be speaking on Friday morning, I think.
Okay, I'm Saturday morning. So
okay, all right. Well, I'll check you out on Friday then for sure. I don't know if I'll be on Saturday as well, but I'll look out for you. We'll definitely find a time to chat.
Cool. Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.